Sun's over there, so you gotta face this way.
First off, how many of you guys are not from Dallas or visiting here? Okay, welcome to Nut Country.
Thank you.
You guys know the basic story of little Oswald. I wish we were at the scene right now. Oswald supposedly walking east on 10th Street. Tippit supposedly also driving east on 10th Street, according to the Warner Report. And he sees the back of his head, somehow connects him with the description on the vague description on the radio, and then pulls him over, and then isn't satisfied. He gets out to apprehend the man, and he shoots him across the hood and runs up Patton and down Jefferson Street. And I just want to jump right into it. I think these are some stuff that I think some people not forget about, but sort of overlook, or it's not mentioned enough. The closest witness was a man named Domingo Benavides, and fun fact, the Warner Report actually misspelled his name. It's actually spelled Benavidez. He described the killer this way: about 5'11", had a complexion a little bit darker than average, a little bit ruddier than mine. Now he's Mexican American, so he had dark hair that was a little bit curly, and he looked like he needed a haircut for about 2 weeks. And had a hairline that sort of went tapered off and consisted of a square in the back. Does that sound like Oswald? No. There's a woman by the name of Helen Louise Markham. She talked with the FBI that day. This is her FBI statement from that day, November 22nd. She described the killer as about 18, black wavy hair, red complexion. That sound like the Oswald we've come to know and love all these years.
His face could have been flushed.
She passed out on the scene. She said I fainted 3 or 4 times before the lineup. They had to give her smelling. Right. Thank you. They had to give her smelling salts
Downtown.
They were thinking about transporting her to a hospital. She was given sedatives before the lineups, and she kept passing out during the lineup. That's in volume 20, page 587. She affirmed 6 times under oath that she did not recognize anyone in the lineup.
Can I ask a question?
Well, yeah, sure.
I thought she picked him out of the lineup.
Well, let me read you the testament.
Okay.
Mr. Ball, did you recognize anyone in the lineup? Mrs. Markham, no, sir. You did not? Did you recognize anyone from their face? From their face, no. Did you identify anybody in these 4 people? I didn't know nobody. I know you didn't know anybody, but did anybody in the lineup look like anybody you had seen before? No, I had never seen none of them, not one of these men. Not one of the 4? Not one of them. Not one of all 4? No, sir. And then she said, I looked at him. When I saw this man, I wasn't sure, but I had cold chills just run all over me. Okay. So that's the star witness. They referred her as reliable, but behind the scenes, there's a memo where it says this witness is very unsure of herself on most points. It's up in the National Archives. She was referred to behind the scenes as utterly unreliable, full of mistakes, contradictory, and worthless. And Joe Ball, who wrote the chapter on the Tippit murder, is actually a subchapter. It's not even a chapter. He called her an utter screwball in a public debate with Mark Lane in '64. So that's what they said behind the scenes, but what they said publicly in the Warren Report was that she was reliable. And despite all this, they came out and said, quote, "The commission wants to believe Mrs. Markham, and that's all there is to it." The commission wants to believe Mrs. Markham. That's all there is to it. Let's go down the street a bit. Scoggins, the taxi driver, Scoggins, they showed him a photo lineup. Scoggins, the taxi driver, and he admitted in his testimony that he picked out the wrong photo. He picked out a man other than Oswald. That is volume 3, page 335, and the FBI showed him a picture of Oswald, and it says right here, Mr. Scoggins stated after viewing a photograph of Lee Harvey Oswald, he could not be sure the person he had observed in Oak Cliff on November 22nd was actually identical with Lee Harvey Oswald. Okay, let's get to these the lineups. In the Friday lineups, Oswald was thrown in with 3 men in dress attire. One of them had a red vest, another one had a nice knit sweater, and one had a sport coat. And on the second day, Lee was thrown in with 2 teenagers and a Hispanic. So, I mean, you don't have to be too bright to know who the suspect is. And all this about the lineups is in Volume 7. They actually took testimony of each person in the lineup, which I think a lot of people forget about. One of the guys was brown hair, dark complexion. Another guy named Clark was blonde. He had blonde hair in the lineup. He had a ruddy complexion. Another one had dark hair, had a ruddy complexion. I think a lot of people forget about this. The witnesses did not view the lineup separately. Sam Ginyard said that he and Ted Calloway were in the lineup together, so they're sitting right next to each other. Very improper. Very improper. Very improper.
I don't think anybody disagrees with that.
They were sitting right next to each other.
Did Lavelle do the lineup?
Yeah. So Ginyard and Calloway were together at the lineup, and the 2 Davis sisters, Virginia and Barbara, were also together, sitting right next to each other at the lineup. And Scoggins and the other taxi driver who drove Oswald, Whaley, they were also together. So you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 people. Elmer Boyd, I have to think of it. Elmer Boyd even admitted in his testimony, Volume 7, page 125, he admitted under oath that the police lineups, that they were dressed better than Oswald. And Fritz had testified that the people in the lineup had fixed themselves so that they would look like prisoners, which they not having.
Yeah, I think most agree that they screwed up.
They were thrown in. He was thrown in with men in dress attire, 2 teens and a Hispanic. They didn't resemble Oswald. Commission Counsel Eisenberg said on the record, there's a slight problem here with the ballistics evidence, which I think is an understatement. Even Boggs said at one point, "What proof do you have, though, that these are the bullets?" I kind of think of Hillary when she's like, "What difference at this point does it make?" So Boggs said, "What proof do you have that these are the bullets?"
Please don't ruin your presentation.
Bullets or casings?
He said bullets. That's Volume 3, page 477. Shells are not listed on the police report. The shells weren't entered into evidence for 6 days. Domingo, who found the first 2 shells, they took the 4 shells over to him. They wanted him to pick out the 2 that he found, and he was unable to pick out the shells that he had found that day. And the Davis sisters were shown the shells, and they could not pick out the shells as the ones that they found that day. Sergeant Barnes initialed the 2 shells that Domingo found. He initialed them, and they disappeared. They're not on them. Brown initialed the Davis sister shells, and so did Officer Doherty. Their initials are not there. Marina was not able to identify the jacket in evidence. She said in her testimony, it seems he had that one. It seems he had that one. But they said that that she identified it. Helen Markham said she had never seen the jacket in evidence before when they handed it to her. Scoggins said, I thought it was darker. Barbara Davis said the killer wore a black coat. And when she was shown it, she said, no, that's not the one. William Arthur Smith said the killer wore a sport coat. Ted Calloway said, I think it had more tan to it. Ron Reynolds said it was a bluish jacket. So dark-ish jacket. The jacket in evidence was only sold in California and Philadelphia, both where Oswald had not lived as a civilian. Mrs. Donald Higgins, she said the killer definitely was not the man they showed on television. Witness Jimmy Burt said he told reporter Al Chapman, the man that I saw kill Tippit was not Lee Harvey Oswald. I got a good look at him. I'm sure it wasn't Oswald. It just didn't look like him. Those are some of the key points that I think a lot of people don't really talk about.
Can I ask you a question?
Talk about as much. Hold on. Talk about as much. And by the way, everything I just mentioned is not in the book with Malice. Everything I just mentioned is not in that book.